Hey guys, Steinixos here. So, today we're going to be talking about the 5 Kage from the 4th Great Ninja War in Naruto. That is, the Hokage Tsunade, the Raikage Ai, the Tsuchikage Onoki, the Kazekage Gaara, and the Mizukage Meiterume, all against the heavenly demon Don Quixote Doflamingo from One Piece, to see who would win in a fight. Now, just to be clear, this is not a 1-by-1 sequential matchup where each Kage takes turns fighting Doflamingo. No, you see, this is all 5 Kage working together at the same time against Doflamingo by himself. So you can think of it as something similar to how all 5 Kage worked together against Madara during the war arc. Now, just as a quick disclaimer, if you're new to power scaling, or even if you are a veteran of power scaling, but you are new to my coverage of versus battles, then I heavily encourage you to watch the videos in my power scaling fundamental series, as they cover most of the typical recurrent comments and concerns that usually come up in these situations. But with that understood, let's get into it. Now, right off the bat, many of you probably realize that this isn't even remotely a fair fight. Like, it's not even close. But to really understand why that is, we have to take a moment to look back at just how strong the 5 Kage actually are. So, just as a quick refresher, in Naruto, the title of Kage represents the highest authority in a hidden village, which means the 5 Kage are the leaders of the hidden leaf, the hidden cloud, the hidden stone, the hidden mist, and the hidden sand. And being the heads of their villages, they're generally the strongest shinobi their nations have to offer, though there are a few rare exceptions here and there in the broader lore. Also, each Kage techniques usually reflect the theme of their village. For example, the cloud with unmatched lightning enhancement, the stone with weight manipulation and earth release mastery, the mist with corrosive and hidden mist tactics, and the sand with sand manipulation. And the leaf, well, they are kind of non-specific. They just do everything. Now, we could easily sit here all day and gush over the inhuman feats these Kage have displayed. Tsunade's monstrous strength, Ai's lightning-boosted blitzes, Onoki's particle style potentially destroying the whole island turtle, Gaara's sand protecting the entirety of the hidden sand village from Deidara's explosion, and Mei's lava and boil releases melting through nearly anything. But doing a deep dive on every individual feat would make this video go on forever, and that's not even really necessary, because in a versus matchup, what we actually care about are the max aspects of the 5 major categories of comparison. That is, speed, attack potency, durability, including any regenerative ability, hacks, and then that 5th miscellaneous category for things like battle IQ, teamwork, and other special factors. So starting with speed, the 4th Raikage can serve as our best rubric in evaluating the Kage, because you see, aside from Minato and a handful of top-tier shinobi that evolved in strength or appeared in the latter part of the war arc, aside from those special cases, the Raikage was widely considered the fastest ninja alive during the war arc. Because of that, we can be sure that if we use his speed as the speed for all of the Kage, we will definitely not be underestimating them. And again, Madara even literally confirms to us that Tsunade, for example, is slower than the Raikage. Now, the Raikage's speed mainly comes from a databook statement describing him as moving close to the speed of light. And in support of this, you'll also often see people bring up a manga panel where it says that his synapses fire as fast as a flash of light. Now, most people who read this instantly realize as fast as a flash of light is more of a literary device and not meant to be taken as literal light speed. But we don't even need to argue about this, because this is just a fan translation. In the actual official Viz translation, we see where what the subordinate actually says is that the 4th Raikage's nerve transmission and his reaction speed are on par with that of the yellow flash. That is to say, the 4th Hokage Minato, not an actual literal flash of light. So that does not actually help to prove anything. However, we will just go with the databook statement and just scale Raikage, as well as all the other Kage, to light speed. Now I really want to emphasize, even though it is the culture in online power scaling to make it seem like every single verse is just casually light speed, that is not actually the case. And we are not underestimating the Kage by having them move at light speed. In fact, we are being pretty generous. Because remember, when Mabui was speaking about her heavenly transfer technique, which moves things at the speed of light, she notes that even most high-tier shinobi can't survive at this speed. You have to have an extremely durable physique like the 3rd and 4th Raikage to survive moving at these speeds. And again, we literally saw that Tsunade was damaged by it, only really being able to withstand it due to her regeneration. Now, whenever this comes up, I'll often hear people try to circumvent it by saying something like, oh, that's just because they are traveling a long distance. So that reflects more a limitation in travel speed rather than combat and reaction speed. Now firstly, you'll note that no such distinction of saying that ninjas can survive this when it's in combat versus traveling is ever made in the actual manga. It is just outright said that this is too fast a speed for most people. But secondly, and more importantly, let's just think about this for a second. It takes light 0.13 seconds to travel our world that has a circumference of over 40,000 kilometers. Tsunade and Raikage likely were not traversing even 1/10 of that distance to get to the Great Ninja War battlefield, so they were under the effect of light speed travel for much less than 0.13 seconds. So even though the time they would sustain this speed with one dodge or one attack would likely be significantly much less, it's not like these are entirely worlds apart, especially when you are trying to make the claim that they can sustain these speeds for multiple attacks across prolonged battles. Or even worse, if it is a claim about continuous combat movement speed where they are in continuous combat, moving at those speed without stopping. In this case, of continuous combat speed especially, even though they are not physically actually traversing some far distance, the time spent fighting continuously at this speed is often far longer than the time it would take to traverse this far distance. So again, all of this is not to say that there can't be someone off jutsu here and there that has light speed movement. However, it is pretty silly to try to disregard this established fact, that in the Naruto world, light speed is a hard cap. For even super strong characters like Tsunade, who remember is one of the most physically strong ninjas in the verse, and the stated speed of the Raikage, the fastest ninja in the verse, minus a few exceptions, is just near light speed, yet we are granting light speed not only to just Raikage, but also to Tsunade, who is explicitly stated to be slower than the Raikage, and all the other Kage who are also obviously slower than him as well, on account of him being the fastest ninja alive, minus a few exceptions. So we are being very generous here. Now, moving on to attack potency, you can actually argue that Tsunade has the most impressive raw conventional attack potency out of the group. She shattered Madara's Susanoo ribcage with a single kick and broke multiple Susanoo blades, and on top of that she's explicitly stated to be physically stronger than the Raikage by Madara. Now yes, Raikage and Mei did also damage parts of Madara's Susanoo, but in Raikage's case it only happened after being buffed by Onoki's weight alteration jutsu, and nobody seriously argues that Mei's AP is above Tsunade or the Raikage. Now, just from damaging Madara's Susanoo, you could scale the Kage up to small country level attack potency. But again, to avoid underestimating them, we will instead use the Karin statement comparing Raikage's chakra level to a tailed beast, and thus scale him and all his fellow Kage to the attack potency of the combined Biju Bomb of Kurama and Gyuki, which is currently calculated to be roughly 12.4 teratons, or country level. Now again, I want to emphasize, as I'm sure there are people who are going to accuse me of underestimating the Kage, but again, we are actually being pretty generous here, because firstly, as explained in my The Creation Problem Power Scaling Fundamentals video, using a chakra level statement like this is not something I'd usually do in the first place. However, this is low level stuff, and I want to give them as much benefit of the doubt as reasonably possible, so we'll just treat this one as unique. Secondly, the tailed beasts vary significantly in strength depending on the point in the series, and they have different attacks of different levels. Thus, having a statement saying I is Biju level doesn't mean I is as strong as their strongest attacks from their strongest versions. Furthermore, remember the statement just says Biju level, meaning singular, but the strength I'm assigning him is that of an attack that has the combined attack potency from two-tailed beasts. And again, even a super strong attack, like the Jubi's Tenpenchi, which almost nobody reasonably scales the Kage to, even that is calculated to around 8 teratons. Moreover, Madara's Tengai Shinsei, that gigantic meteor, the one that had the Kage, and allied forces losing their mind and nearly broke their spirits, that is currently calculated to be around 2 teratons. Now obviously, their reaction to it alone is not sufficient to say that they do not scale to it, and we have to remember their goal was not to destroy the meteor, because anything short of an attack like a large enough dust release, completely evaporating the meteor in its entirety, anything short of that would likely just lead to a lot of large fragments, which would cause massive collateral damage to the allied forces. However, we can be reasonably certain that their conventional attack potency likely does not scale above this, given that it took at least Onoki and Gaara working together, expending quite a bit of their strength to even slow down that meteor. So again, I want to emphasize that scaling the Kage to an attack over 6 times stronger than this meteor is already giving them more than their fair share of generosity. Moving on to durability and regenerative ability, Raikage likely has the highest raw durability out of all the Kage. Given the aforementioned Mabui discussion, that is, he was not damaged when utilizing the Mabui Lightspeed Jutsu, unlike Tsunade, and as Mabui herself highlighted, physical toughness is basically one of the defining characteristics of the 3rd and 4th Raikage. However, if you wanted to be super technical, you could also make the case that Gaara's sand is tougher than the Raikage, since it was not damaged by Amaterasu, but that, and a bunch of other arguments, have a lot of nuances to them that would take forever to tease out. And we don't even necessarily need to figure out who is the most durable one in the first place, as we are assigning them all the strongest max durability. Thus we can instead just cheat a little and make our lives easier by just scaling their durability to their attack potency. That is, so we'll assume they are also country level in durability. Now again, just to be clear, I explained in my The Durability Problem video why we need to be super careful with this scaling durability to one's attack potency, as in most cases it's likely an overestimation. However, we are doing it here because the central theme of this video is trying our best not to underestimate the Kage. Thus an overestimation is welcomed. Then, as it relates to regeneration, only Tsunade really contributes here. Her regeneration, by the classifications I laid out in my The Regeneration Problem video, falls under enhanced healing, meaning she can completely recover from severe trauma and reattach severed body parts. But she can't regenerate entire limbs from nothing or survive severe damage to or loss of the core organs of the heart or brain. Now, even though the other Kage don't have regeneration on their own, Tsunade can heal them mid-battle, within reason, which improves their overall staying power when they're fighting as a coordinated unit. Now before we move on, let us just linger on this regen point a little bit. I know some of you are probably a little upset that I'm saying Tsunade's regeneration is this low, especially given that she herself has said she can regenerate limbs and organs. However, when you actually go through all of her regeneration feats, you'll notice that she has never actually demonstrated the ability to survive the complete loss of the core organs of the head or the heart. As a matter of fact, she's never even been shown regenerating a limb from nothing. Now normally, even with this lack of confirming feats, I'd be willing to just trust what a character says, because characters don't always get the opportunity to show off the full extent of their ability. But here's the thing, she did get a chance to prove those claims. That is, when she was bisected by Madara. Again, you'll note when this happened, she wasn't able to regrow her lower body from nothing. Her upper and lower halves had to be manually brought back together, and then the healing occurred by reconnecting them. So you can blame it on her not having enough chakra in that moment. Sure, but the fact of the matter is that the reality of what we are shown simply doesn't justify the claims that she can regenerate fully lost limbs or fully destroyed core organs of the head or the heart. Now if I'm being generous, I'd say it's fine to bring her up from enhanced healing into the core organ regeneration category, because you could argue that healing from a bisection, regardless of how it's done, is more impressive than regenerating a limb from nothing. Sure, I'd be fine with that. but to ignore the clear fact that she has never actually demonstrated true limb regrowth, much less survival after losing the core organs of the head or the heart, coupled with the fact that we've seen a clear limitation to her regeneration given that her bisection regeneration feat was not her regrowing her lower half from nothing. It had to be the manual bringing together of the two halves physically, then reconnection through healing, to just ignore all these clear facts, and then just assert that she should be above core organ limited regeneration, being able to survive the complete loss of her head and her heart. That would be unreasonable, and frankly, just dishonest. Now someone might try to argue that when she used Mabui's lightspeed transfer technique, her head and her heart were completely destroyed, and that she regenerated from that. But again, firstly, that was never shown, and secondly, even if you believed that Tsunade was that weak, which itself would push the whole lightspeed meta back even further, even then, given what we've actually seen from her, it still makes far more sense to assume that she was simply healing herself continuously, outpacing the damage, such that it never reached to the point of complete destruction. Similar to in JJK when Hakari continuously healed his head, because a completely destroyed head would prevent him from using reverse curse technique to regenerate at all. So yeah, Tsunade is core organ regeneration level at best if we're being generous. Now, when it comes to hacks, this is Onoki's realm, specifically with his particle style jutsu, or Jinton, which disassembles matter at a molecular level. And just for convenience, even though Mei's elemental attacks aren't really considered hacks, as we still generally view them in the normal attack potency categories, for convenience, I'll still place these in the hacks category, as we can still have side tangent discussions about maybe the heat of lava style, plus her water style being a potential win condition, given that this is a battle against a devil fruit user. And of course, Tsunade also has a few hacked out medical ninjutsu, like being able to change her chakra to electricity and sending it into an opponent's body, thus disrupting their nervous system. Finally, when we consider miscellaneous factors, the first thing we obviously acknowledge is that these are Kage level shinobi. They're elite, experienced, battle-hardened fighters with high combat IQ. But what's more interesting here is their synergy. Even though Madara was casually no-diffing them, the 5 Kage actually worked together extremely well. You had combination techniques like Onoki amplifying the Raikage's speed with weight reduction, Gaara's sand could protect the others while Mei and Onoki supplied range pressure, and combination elemental attacks were used multiple times during the war. So even though they were completely outclassed by Madara, their teamwork and coordination were legitimately impressive, and in any battle where they aren't completely outclassed, their synergy becomes a real factor. So with the overwhelming strength of the Kage, complemented by their high battle IQ and almost flawless synergy, once you really lay all that out, it should be pretty clear how this fight goes. That's right, Doflamingo controls them all with his strings and has them fight each other, while he sits back in a lounge chair and enjoys the show with a glass of martini. Wait, what? Yeah. For a lot of you, I know this is probably pretty surprising and borderline unacceptable. I can already see some of you hovering over the comment section, ready to accuse me of being biased, ready to say, of course the guy with the giant straw hat on his avatar and who mainly posts One Piece content picks the One Piece character to win, how surprising. But even if you don't like the conclusion, you see, as I said at the very beginning, once you actually break it down, this was never even close. Like, let's start with speed. As I emphasized before, even being super generous with the Kage, they are, at absolute best, light speed. Meanwhile, Doflamingo is casually faster than light, because he's able to keep up with Gear 4 Dressrosa arc Luffy. Now for those of you who don't know, even an immediate post-time skip base Luffy, not Gear 2, not Gear 4, just base, was not only dodging a literal light speed beam, but he was also even calling it too slow. Again, this is base Luffy. Base Luffy, who then has Gear 2, which is significantly faster than base, and Gear 4, which is significantly faster than Gear 2. So there's no question, Doflamingo is comfortably beyond lightspeed. However, there are a lot of really popular cope arguments that have buried themselves in the online power scaling zeitgeist over the years to try to discredit this feat. You'll hear people say things like, it's just observation hacky aim dodging, or that Luffy wasn't calling the light beam slow, but was calling the pacifista slow instead. Now because these arguments are so pervasive, and I don't want to waste time responding to the same dumb arguments every time someone brings it up, I've already incorporated the responses to the most common versions in my The Speed Problem Power Scaling Fundamentals video. And some of the more archaic ones are covered in an older video as well, so you can watch those for the detailed breakdown. But again, I really want to highlight something. Even if those arguments against this immediate post-time skip Luffy feat were somehow correct, and even if we pretended we couldn't use that moment by itself, I need you all to understand that I only reference this feat because I like to underestimate One Piece in my videos. I intentionally start the light speed meta post time skip just to keep things simple, because the truth is, we can easily go back even into pre-time skip and find Luffy and Kid, who didn't even have observation haki at the time, dodging light speed beams. And even if you tried to overinflate Naruto by insisting that the Kage must be faster than light because the databooks say Kirin is light speed, firstly, that's nonsense scaling. It's directly contradicted by the manga itself, which plainly says Kirin moves at lightning speed and explains why. And because there's always someone who wants to argue against established crystal clear facts just to push an agenda, I've already made a dedicated response to this Kirin argument in my The Databook Problem Power Scaling Fundamentals video, so I'm not wasting time re-arguing that here. But even if for the sake of discussion I granted that nonsense scaling, then firstly I'd just like to point out it still does not matter, because a pre-time skip Luffy or Captain Kid that is dodging light beams, even if it is close to the end of the pre-time skip, this Luffy is still unimaginably slower than a post-time skip Doflamingo. But again, if we really felt like just cranking things up to the extreme, then I'd simply just invoke an even earlier version of pre-time skip Luffy, Skypiea Luffy, who is stated by the author to need light speed reactions to dodge Enel's lightning. And that's a Luffy before Gear 2 even existed. And this is further supported by the very next arc, where Luffy dodges Foxy's Noro photons, and photons by definition are light speed. Now again, I don't usually bring these arguments up, not because they're irreconcilably flawed, but because I'm usually trying to underestimate One Piece, rather than trying to push Luffy and the One Piece verse to light speed as early as possible. And of course, someone will bring up Haku. They'll say, well, Haku was stated to be light speed in a data book, so everyone in Naruto, even from the beginning of series, should automatically scale to faster than light. And again, I'm not going to entertain dumb arguments like that. Anyone who isn't an agenda-driven moron understands that a proper contextual reading doesn't support that conclusion. Kirin is lightning speed. The fastest ninja in the world, the Kage, is only near light speed, and light speed itself is treated as a hard ceiling for even Tsunade Asanin, one of the strongest shinobi alive during the war. But what about attack potency and durability? Again, as I said, when we're being generous, the Kage are country level at around 12.4 teratons at best. Doflamingo, on the other hand, sits drastically higher. You see, firstly, we know he far outscales characters like Don Chinjao and his son Don Sai, characters who can split an ice continent. And yes, I know, this is not my first rodeo. I already know the moment I bring this feat up. The same old tired cope arguments that have been circling the internet since time immemorial, insisting that this feat is city level at best, will obviously rear their ugly head. But again, this is very silly when you consider context like the fact that this ice wasn't normal ice, but rather was some hyper durable ice that even multiple men with flamethrowers and pickaxes not only could not damage, but they could not even scratch it. Furthermore, it becomes even sillier when you remember that Prime Chinjao was clashing with Garp, who used 8 mountains as sandbags, which he turned to dust, to prepare for their fight, one which was recurring. And this was obviously not an exaggeration, given we have literally seen Garp effortlessly toss a 180-meter tall San Juan wolf into the sea. Not to mention the God Valley battle where his and Roger clashes against rocks, collapsed a large mountain and ultimately resulted in the destruction of the entire island itself. But I'm not going to rehash the entire breakdown here, because in my How Strong is Gear 5 Luffy video, I already walked through Chinjao's scaling in full detail, with full context, and explained exactly why downplaying it below country level is absurd. And even if you pretend that the Chinjao Ninja feat doesn't exist. Luffy himself was already continental by the time he reached Dressrosa. Again, you can see the whole supporting chain laid out in that How Strong is Gear 5 Luffy video. But again, for the sake of argument, let us even just ignore all of that. Let us say that the Don Chinjao feat is city level at best, and no amount of context can change that. And let's also just say that the How Strong is Gear 5 Luffy video, elucidating Luffy's strength to be easily continental by Dressrosa. Let us also just say that it is a fraudulent video that is literally just the product of bogus multipliers and calc stacking, thus it should be completely ignored. And let us go even further and also just completely ignore the fact that even on Versus Battle Wiki right now, even the second weakest member of the pre-time skip CP9, Fukuro, his durability is scaled to large mountain level due to scaling him to Frankie surviving this explosion, which is calculated to be 1.87 gigatons. Thus, using the fact we know that every single major post-time skip Fishman antagonist like Yuzu obviously has a much greater base durability than pre-time skip CP9 members like Fukuro, and any version of pre-time skip Frankie. Because firstly, common sense, but secondly, because even a stronger member of the CP9 like Blueno, even while using Tekai which further amplifies his durability, could not even take more than 2 hits from a pre-time skip gear 2 Luffy. Even hybrid form Lucci was taking significant damage from a pre-time skip gear 2 Luffy punch. But again, Yuzu is tanking it from a post-time skip gear 2 Luffy, who remember grew so much that he can literally make a pacifista explode with a single gear 2 punch, when before his whole crew, all attacking together with their strongest attacks, could barely take out a pacifista, thus again, even drastically underestimating Yuzu's base durability and attack potency to the pre-time skip second weakest CP 9 member durability of 1.87 gigatons. And then just taking into account the basic inarguable fact that Yuzu, like Hody, obviously took more than 10 energy steroids, which would make him at least 1,000 times stronger and thus over 1.87 teratons or small country level. Yet Fishman Island Zoro casually wiped him out. So Luffy and Zoro were easily country level before Dressrosa even began. But again, let's just ignore that, because some people don't like the energy steroids, which is an integral plot element of Fishman Island scaling. Okay, cool, because again, even if we ignore all of that, there is still the NL moon scaling. You see, pre-time skip, post losing to Luffy in Skypiea, Enel flew to the moon, where the space pirates triggered a moon explosion visible from the Earth. That explosion on Versus Battle Wiki has been calculated as multi-continental, and even they scale Enel's attack potency to that explosion because he damaged machinery that survived it. Now obviously, a post-time skip warlord antagonist like Doflamingo obviously scales above a pre-time skip Enel, so right there, you have Doflamingo at least at multi-continental. But I already know there will still be people out there who claim that a pre-time skip NL is somehow stronger than a post-time skip Gear 4 Luffy and Doflamingo. Because again, even Versus Battle Wiki apparently believes this, as they have Dressrosa Arc Luffy and Doflamingo at country level. So okay, sure, let us contort even more and ignore that as well. Let us then instead zoom in strictly on some post-time skip Perry Dressrosa feats. Now just to help situate us, remember, in the 4th Great Ninja War, Madara slicing the tops off 2 mountains with his perfect Susanoo had the Kage shaken. Meanwhile, in One Piece, Punk Hazard Law, who is significantly weaker than Doflamingo, is casually doing this same feat and even closer to the base of the main mountains. Now note, Law's feat is currently calculated to island level around 20 gigatons, which, from a calculation perspective, is much weaker than the Madara feat, which is also large island level, but at 990 gigatons. However, remember, that was just an introduction to help situate you. The main course is actually in Dressrosa, where we meet Pika, who fuses with a city to become a mountain which Zoro cleanly and casually splits in half. Again, I want to emphasize, at the end of that Pika fight, it was so casual for Zoro that he was only concerned if he nicked his blade or not. And this feat is calculated to be 17.25 teratons. Now, a Dressrosa Arc Gear for Luffy and full strength Doflamingo is obviously at least comparable to a casual Zoro. So yet again, here we have Doflamingo attack potency and durability being stronger than the Kage at their best. Now of course, despite all the accommodations I've made so far, I know there will still be someone out there who says, Stein, I don't care about any Chinjao related statement or feat. I don't care about any context you give me about Luffy's progression in strength. I don't care that the energy steroids are an integral part of the Fishman Island arc's plot. With clearly delineated effects, they still don't count. Enel's multi-continental mooncalc is obviously trash, and even if it were credible, pre-time skip, Enel is obviously stronger than post-time skip Dressrosa arc gear for Luffy and Doflamingo, and Zoro cutting Pika doesn't matter. All calculations that have One Piece characters above city level are wrong. Now again, for the sake of argument, let's contort even further. Let us go full pretzel here and accommodate everything. Let's say none of those statements, none of those feats, none of those integral plot elements or calculations can work simply because you don't like them. Even if we ignore absolutely every ounce of strict attack potency and durability scaling in One Piece, it still doesn't save the Kage. Because Doflamingo doesn't need raw AP to win. You see, his Parasite string marionette ability, his string manipulation that immobilizes and even outright controls opponents, has already been shown working on very strong characters. Even pre-time skip, he used it on Jozu, who by the way even versus Battle Wiki currently has at moon level, and in Dressrosa he used it on Sanji. So immobilizing the Kage, let alone controlling them and making them fight each other, would be child's play. And the fact that there are multiple Kage doesn't help them either, because Doflamingo has already demonstrated the ability to control entire armies remotely. We literally saw him puppeteering all of Dressrosa's royal army at once. So 5 targets, again, is laughably easy from a numbers perspective. Furthermore, as we already mentioned, Doflamingo far outspeeds the Kage in raw speed. So even though the Kage theoretically have a win condition with Onoki's particle style jutsu, none of their attacks would land in the first place. But from a hacks perspective, it gets even worse. Because Doflamingo has observation haki. And remember, even basic observation lets you sense the presence, number, and position of opponents, and even predict their attacks. So even if the Kage attempted some complicated team synergy, some elaborate trap to corner him and atomize him with particle style, that simply wouldn't work. And this same problem exists with trying to escape his Parasite string marionette control, even though the Kage have theoretical ways of breaking free, for example burning the strings with Mei's lava style, or Onoki using particle style to atomize them. The fact remains, Doflamingo is able to predict all of this with observation haki, and thus is able to stop it all in advance. For example, by preventing Onoki from using the handstands, he needs to use particle style, and he can literally just keep Mei's mouth shut. Again, Doflamingo is faster than them. He's reading all of their movements in advance, and he has absolutely no reason to ever be in a position where they could threaten him. And it gets even more hopeless when you remember that Doflamingo can produce string clones, fully functional copies of himself that move, attack, and deceive opponents. And whereas Doflamingo can see through any clones the Kage make using observation haki, as haki can sense life force, the Kage on the other hand, without equalization, have no easy built-in way to identify which one is the real Doflamingo. I mean, unless we were to really push it and say, the string clones should not have a heartbeat. Therefore, due to the fact that Tsunade was able to figure out that Orochimaru's heartbeat was irregular by looking at him, she should also then be able to use heartbeat detection to differentiate the real Doffy from his clones. Now there are a few things that would go against that, like the fact that Tsunade and the rest of the Kage were not able to tell that Madara was using a wood clone when they were trying to seal him. But it does not matter, because even if we were to grant that they could differentiate the real Doflamingo from the clones, it's not like facing these clones is a walk in the park. Remember, these clones are strong enough to face off equally against Law. They can also use all of Doflamingo's string abilities, such as his bullet thread, and even if they are damaged, it's not like they just go away. they can function absolutely normally in a damaged state. Or he can just reform them or use them to carry out some other technique. And again, remember, the Kage are fighting an opponent who is not only massively faster than them, but who is also predicting their movements. Now obviously, because there's a Devil Fruit user in this versus match, thus someone watching this is already leaning forward in their seat ready to say, but what about water though? May has water. Doesn't Doflamingo just automatically lose? And again, as we've already established, they can't even touch Doflamingo in the first place. He's too fast and can predict their movement. But let's do some more contortion and try to entertain this anyway. Let's say May completely floods the battlefield. What would Doflamingo do then? Does he not just drown? Now firstly, May has never shown anything remotely close to the ability to create or sustain a battlefield-wide flood unless the arena was ridiculously restricted. But even then, let's pretend she could make this happen. Even so, this does nothing against Doflamingo because Doflamingo can fly, and if someone tries to argue, well, we know Doflamingo flies by attaching his strings to the water molecules in the clouds, so what if coincidentally it's a completely cloudless day? Or the Kage figure out a way to remove all clouds? How does he fly then? Now firstly, I really want you all to appreciate the amount of contortions we're doing here to try to scrape together a possible win for the Kage. But secondly, even with all that, Doflamingo can instantly create massive structures, like the bird cage, which can span the length and circumference of an entire island, like Dressrosa, and which extends far into the sky. So even without clouds, Doflamingo can create his own footholds and remain airborne indefinitely. And again, when it comes to controlling the battlefield, none of the Kage are anywhere close to Doflamingo because Devil Fruit Awakening exists. Awakening allows him to convert the literal environment, even Gaara's sand, into strings he can manipulate. So not only is Doflamingo stronger than them, can outmaneuver them, outpace them, and outread them, he can also weaponize the battlefield against them. So by now, I hope you understand, there is just nothing the Kage can reasonably do here. This fight was never close. You could literally tie both of Doflamingo's hands behind his back and blindfold him, and he still wins. And trust me, I know, even if you agree that Doflamingo wins this fight, and even by a landslide at that, even then, that statement saying he can win blindfolded and with his hands tied behind his back will still sound like an exaggeration. But again, what you need to understand is that's actually not an exaggeration. It is an entirely factual statement because you see, observation haki literally allows you to fight without your sight. Training with a blindfold was literally even part of Luffy's training. And Doflamingo has demonstrated the ability to use his strings when not even fully paying attention while being on the phone, as Baby 5 is actively trying to off him. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. But anyway, see you guys next time.